the sea was already warning them. Not with one great sign, not with thunder, not yet. Just small things. The groan of wet timber, the restless pull beneath the hull, the kind of wind that does not strike at once, but circles first, as if it is choosing where to tear. And Robinson Crusoe stood on that ship like a man who still believed the world could be mastered. Maybe that is how these stories always begin. Not with evil, not with tragedy, just with a man who thinks he still has time. He had crossed water before. He had outlived storms before. He had escaped things that should have buried him. So when the sky darkened, perhaps he did what proud men do best. He told himself it would pass. You know that feeling, don't you? When the warning is there, plain as day, but because disaster has not yet arrived, you treat it like a rumor. The sailors moved faster now. Ropes pulled. Orders barked. Canvas snapped above them like gunfire. The ship began to climb and fall. Climb and fall. Each drop a little deeper than the last. And still, there is that strange moment before true panic. That last thin instant where men pretend they are still in command. Then the sea chose. The storm did not arrive like weather. It arrived like judgment. The sky vanished. Day turned to ash. Waves rose not as water, but as walls, black and alive, slamming the vessel from one side and then the other. Men shouted and vanished in spray. The mast screamed. Barrels broke loose. The deck pitched so violently that every step became a gamble between survival and the deep. And Robinson, who had chased danger across oceans, finally understood something men usually learn too late. The sea does not know your name. It does not care what you wanted from life. It does not care what you escaped, what you built, what you planned to become when this voyage was over. It only takes the measure of wood, wind, and flesh. And on that night, all three were failing. A cry went up. Land? Reef? Sandbar? No one could tell. It hardly mattered. The ship struck with a violence that shattered every thought in a man's head. One impact, then another. Timber splitting, men thrown down. Water pouring in as if the ocean had opened a door and stepped inside. After that, memory becomes pieces. A face in lantern light. A hand slipping from a rope. Salt in the mouth. The impossible cold. The sound of men calling for help in a world too loud to hear them. And then, silence. Not true silence. The hiss of retreating foam. The crash of waves farther off. The panting breath of a body not yet dead. Robinson opened his eyes on sand, alone. That is the real beginning of the story. Not the ship, not the storm, not the life before. This. A man on a shore with no answer coming. He lifted himself, half drowned, bruised, full of salt and terror, and looked back toward the sea. Out there, broken by the gray light, he saw the wreck. Not gone, not yet. Caught far enough offshore to tempt hope, close enough to torture him with it. Imagine that moment. You survive what should kill you, and the dead ship still waits in the water like a second chance. Not a rescue, something crueler, a test. Because now he had to decide very quickly what sort of man he was. The kind who kneels on the beach and weeps for the world that is lost. Or the kind who gets up. Robinson got up. He built a raft, then another. He dragged from the dying ship whatever the sea had not yet claimed. Tools, powder, muskets, bread, planks, sails, rope, nails. Anything a man might someday curse himself for leaving behind. He did not yet know the shape of his future, only this. If the wreck sank before he stripped it bare, then the ocean would take not one life, but all the lives he might still have left to live. So he worked like a man stealing from fate. Day after day, he crossed between shore and wreck, each trip a bargain with death. And little by little, the beach transformed. A gun leaning against driftwood, a chest, a barrel, a blade, a coil of rope. The first ugly pieces of a life that had to be built because no other life was coming. This is the part stories often rush, but they should not. Because survival is not one grand victory. It is 1,000 small refusals to die. A wall raised one post at a time. A shelter hacked from fear and timber. A cave widened by blistered hands. A place to sleep where the rain cannot find you. A way to count the days so time does not melt into madness. He learned the island by failing on it. He learned hunger, heat, fever, the humiliating stupidity of being civilized in a place that has no use for civilized men. He planted badly, built badly, burned things he meant to keep, broke things he could not replace. He made mistakes so ordinary no one writes songs about them, and yet each one could have killed him. That is what makes him compelling, not because he was born for this, because he was not. And still, somehow, he continued. He carved safety out of uncertainty. He raised fences, tamed goats, dried grapes, stored grain, mended tools, watched the seasons, prayed sometimes, raged sometimes, spoke aloud just to hear a human voice, even if it was only his own, returning to him from stone. Years passed that way. Think about that for a second. Not days, not a hard winter, not one dramatic week of suffering that makes for a neat little tale. Years. The kind of years that wear grooves into a man's soul. The kind that force him to invent routines simply to keep from dissolving inside his own thoughts. And then, when the island had almost become a kingdom of one, it happened. A footprint in the sand. Just one. No trumpet. No approaching ship. No army on the horizon. Just the print of a naked human foot pressed into the shore where no human foot should ever have been. And Robinson froze. Because loneliness had been his enemy for so long that he had begun to think another human being would be salvation. But when the proof finally appeared, it did not feel like salvation. It felt like terror. That is one of the truest things in this whole story. A man can beg the world for company, and when company finally comes, he may discover he was only longing for the idea of it. After that footprint, the island changed. Every tree became cover, every shadow a watcher, every distant sound a warning. Robinson fortified his shelter, hid his fire, measured the shoreline with his eyes, and began to understand that survival is not the same thing as safety. You can endure for years and still lose everything in a single afternoon. Then came the day he saw them. Strangers on the shore, a canoe, captives, violence prepared like ritual. And suddenly Robinson was no longer facing hunger or weather or solitude. He was facing mankind again, in one of its oldest and ugliest forms. This is where many men would hide forever. And to be fair, who could blame them? He had spent years preserving one life, his own. To risk it now for a stranger? For someone whose name he did not know, whose language he could not speak, whose fate was not, by any practical measure, his concern. But stories reveal us at the point of inconvenience. Robinson chose to act. A captive broke free. Men pursued him. Robinson stepped from hiding with powder, smoke, and thunder in his hands, and in that wild burst of violence, he saved a life that would change his own. The rescued man would become Friday. And no, the island did not suddenly become easy, but it became human again. That matters. Because a shelter can protect the body, a routine can preserve the mind, but companionship, real companionship, is what drags a man back from becoming a ghost. Friday was not just help. He was interruption, surprise, another pair of eyes on the same horizon, another heartbeat in the silence. Through him, Robinson had to relearn trust, speech, patience, and the strange miracle of no longer carrying every fear alone. Together they hunted, built, watched, planned. Together, they faced the shore that had once been only a line between sea and land, and was now a border between peace and danger. And then, as if the island sensed the story nearing its end, the world returned all at once. A ship, men landing. Not rescuers exactly. Mutineers, armed, treacherous, desperate. And look how beautifully cruel the story becomes here. After all those years trapped on the island, Robinson is finally given a path home. But to seize it, he must become more than a survivor. He must become strategist, hunter, ruler of the only ground he truly understands. The island that once imprisoned him had trained him. Every hidden path, every rise in the land, every patch of cover, every sound in the trees. He knew them now better than any captain knows his own deck. And so the castaway turned the wilderness into a weapon. He allied himself with the men the mutineers had overthrown. He set his traps, chose his moments, struck not with the panic of a drowning man, but with the patience the island had hammered into his bones. And he won. Not easily, never easily, but completely enough. A ship was recovered. The impossible became real. Home, that old dream worn thin by repetition, finally stood before him in timber and sail. So here is the question the story leaves hanging over the water. What if the thing you spend years trying to escape is also the thing that remakes you? Because the boy who chased the sea is gone now. In his place stands a man weathered by loneliness, sharpened by labor, humbled by fear, and kept alive by the stubborn, unglamorous decision to continue one more day, and then one more after that. That is why Robinson Crusoe survives. Not because he was fearless, not because he was chosen, not because the world was kind. He survives because when the storm took everything else, it did not take his will to begin again. And maybe that is why people still remember him. Because sooner or later, every one of us wakes on some shore we did not choose. And the question is always the same. Will you sit in the sand and mourn the ship, or will you build?